Tell me about the Human Factors in Information Design program.
Great. So the program actually dates back quite a while. So it actually dates back to 1990. So it was a very different program at the time, but it's actually interesting as I was thinking about it this morning. It actually reflects the change in the progression in the field over time. So coming out of the 1980s when I entered into the high-tech industry, and it was what I would always refer to as kind of the hardcore high-tech. It was all about engineering. It was all about technology. It was all about functionality and features and power and speed and stability at the time when technology wasn't stable. And that really ruled the day. And so anybody who talked about, and we never talked about user experience at that point in time, but we talked about usability and the learnability of the products. And it was very hard to get anyone's attention around those topics, which seems silly today. Things where we talk about usability as being so basic in a product. At that time it was very hard to get people's attention. Same thing with the whole area of the learnability of the product. So you would see technology at that time would require week-long, 2-week-long training classes. And even then, you would just only be able to begin using the technology. Documentation that would be associated with technology at that time. Sometimes I can remember the old deck systems would have documentation. If you stacked one book on top of another, would be 5 foot high before you were through. So our program at the time there was built around the notion of what I call the external support apparatus. The technology was what it was. They weren't thinking about usability. They weren't thinking about learnability. That was something you did after the fact. And so we wrote these long documentation support guides, and we would design these very long training courses, and we would provide customer support. And so a lot of the program at the time focused around what I would call that external support apparatus, writing better documentation and everything that was associated with that, building better training programs, and building better customer support. So what was really ironic is we would be identifying usability problems in the product, but we weren't allowed to fix them there. We were allowed to fix them outside in documentation, training, and support. So that's what I would call the stage of external support. And we still see that in many products today to a certain extent. And then I would say in the 1990s, the program started moving along where people were saying, this is ridiculous. People don't read the documentation. It causes all sorts of problems. It has cost associated with it. And slowly we saw people start to move a lot of that support from the external world internal within product design. So we saw the growth of usability. Back in the 80s, it was funny. We didn't. There was a time when we didn't even talk about usability. I mean, that term, I'm sure it existed in some camps, but very few of my clients, more of them would talk about learnability and support at that point in time. But usability became very, very important at that point in time. And then the other interesting thing that we see happening there as we look at the program is we see that shift from the focus on technology alone, that you would sell a product and you would price it accordingly, and you would compete in the marketplace just on technology alone. We would see that kind of balance, that equation shift, where now you started selling a product and differentiating your product and pricing your product based on ease of use. That there was no documentation, there was no training, or if there was training you didn't pay for it, or very little need for customer support or expensive consultants. So that started to become a competitive advantage. And I think that's when we began to start to gain some attraction. And so the field at the time, we began to embrace the usability term, and that lasted for about 5 years. And so what we see is this steady march, this steady migration to where we are today, from strictly technology with external support to usability, where we began to seamlessly integrate it into the product design and the interaction experience, and where technology was a differentiator, where it was became technology and usability as differentiator. We began to see the shift towards the user experience. And it's just the nature of the marketplace and understanding the marketplace. And I think this is one of the unique things that we have here at Bentley as a business university is, the business world is focused on the marketplace. And I would always tell my students, I think I probably recognized this kind of thing happening 5, 6, 7 years before it actually would occur in the marketplace. But I would always tell the students to be patient. At the end of the day, it's the marketplace that rules. until the marketplace rises up and say, we're not going to tolerate this unusable technology, we're no longer going to go to the training classes, we're no longer going to read the documentation or pick up the phone, wait in queue for 20 minutes to have somebody to answer a question I shouldn't have to ask. Until the marketplace rises up and demands a different approach to technology design, it wasn't going to happen. And it's the same thing with that approach to just heaping functionality, where we're building more and more bloated products, where again, when you're in a marketplace where pricing and release is determined by, adding more functionality and features to a product, you just become more and more bloated to the point where it really exceeds people's needs. And I think that's the other thing that we saw happening, and we see it integrated in the program as well, is the focus on value. Focusing on what people really value, what makes a difference in their lives. And at the end of the day, it's often not technology. Technology just enables something else. So the focus on what is that core value, and then realize that if you're delivering anything beyond that, as you start to heap features and functionalities and expand and broaden the product, beyond that core value, the value is diminished. And we need to recognize that. And we went for a long period in this industry where that wasn't the case. So we see the program evolving now beyond just usability, because good technology and usability, and we started hearing for the first time where the technology was becoming a commodity. We particularly in maturing industries, in software, box software industries and hardware industries, where the technology was a commodity, and it was very hard to differentiate the product on the technology alone. And it was very hard to differentiate the product on usability alone. And this is where user experience came in. And this is where we see the shift to user experience. And I think even in those early days around 2000 or so of the graduate program, the focus was still on usability. There was still a lot of low-hanging fruit. I'm very happy to say I think a lot of that has gone away. Not all of it. I'm not naive. But a lot of it has gone away. And things have gotten so much better. But as things have gotten better, it requires of the user experience professional to become much more sophisticated in what we do and how we practice our field. And again, this is that shift more towards research and a very deep understanding of interaction design. And I think in the 90s and 2000, it was pretty easy. The problems were pretty simple to find. Convincing people to fix them was yet a different matter. But finding the problems and identifying why they were problems was pretty simple, because they were pretty clear. And our methods were pretty simple at the same time. That's all we needed was simple methods. We did a lot of usability testing. And we were using usability testing to identify problems that should have been caught by other means very early in the process. It was wrong, but it was the right way to do it at the time, because people could see it. They could witness somebody having a problem in a usability test rather than somebody issuing a research report saying, I predict this is going to be a problem. For many people in the field, they had to see the problem before they would recognize, yes, you're right, and it needs to be fixed. And I think building on that experience now, I think people are more accepting of the research now. They realize the value is in predicting a problem before it occurs and avoiding it in the first place. And that's what we're really trying to do at this point in time. And then beyond, I think usability and learnability at the time was really focused on performance. Getting more work out of people, getting people to do things quicker with fewer errors and so on and so forth. It was really focused around human performance. I believe today that user experience is much more sophisticated than that. It's dealing with people's emotional well-being. It's dealing with factors of trust and credibility, and how do you build that into the experience that people have as they interact with the product. So this is where the program is today. It's gone from one where it was external to the product to where it's deeply integrated in the product. It's moved from basic elements of usability to really looking at the user experience from a research perspective in a pretty sophisticated way. I think the other interesting thing that's happening right now in that space where we are right now is where technology 25 years ago was a differentiator. In many industries, the user experience has become the differentiator. It's become the competitive advantage. And I work with so many clients and different industries, traditional, consumer products industries, commercial high-tech applications, e-commerce applications, healthcare, and financial services, where they recognize their core business is a commodity. And the only way they can differentiate themselves from their competitors is providing a better customer or user experience. So that's where we are today, and I think that presents great opportunities to us, but I think again new challenges, because whenever there's a change and whenever there's a shift from one thing differentiating to another, someone's going to be threatened in that shift. And I think that's one of the things that we wrestle with today, and we have to negotiate.
All right, that's a great transition to.
I think I probably answered 4 or 5 questions.
So when I ask people, UX people, about the biggest challenge at work, what I usually hear is that it's hard to engage stakeholders with research.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on this?
I think, again, if you go back and you kind of look at that, and I always refer to it as, kind of the life cycle of the profession, of how we've moved over the last 25 years. I think it was a lot harder 10 years ago. I think it's getting easier with each passing day. I'm very hopeful and very optimistic. I wasn't always that way. But I'm a lot more hopeful, and I think what's very important is to get out of development, and that's always been a goal, going back to the program we have here at Bentley, is to get it out of the development world. And one day I want to see it sitting in the business organization right next to marketing, on an equal footing with marketing. That it's just as important. So right now, I think as we're reporting up through a development organization, I think it does become difficult, because you begin to see that tension and that struggle between the technology as a differentiator and this research as differentiator, and then implemented through design. So it's going to be a lot harder when you're there versus when you're sitting above that and you get to direct the product and I think the approach for the entire development organization. So I know a lot of our students, and I see more of this with each passing year, is they aspire to become product managers, where they're going to have greater control. And see, product management, I think in the past, has come out of engineering and marketing, depending on the kind of organization. I think that's a perfect position for UX people. And I think that's where we want to situate ourselves. And I'm beginning to see more of our graduates who are elevated to the VP ranks as well. And I think that's so exciting. And I think when we start to see that, when they're sitting at the table at that level, we're going to see the wider acceptance of our research.
All right. Tell me about the challenges you've had with people who did not understand why such a program is important or needed.
Yeah, so you're talking strictly about the educational part of the program versus the broader profession.
Yeah.
I learned to move slowly and quietly and kind of build a program or what we do on small successes and build reputation. I think that's absolutely critical. I think it would be very easy to go out and just try to just fight your way through it. I've always found it's far more effective and productive to kind of prove yourself. And so I think we took an interesting approach here at Bentley. I can remember talking to the president back in 1997 when we were launching the graduate program, where I said I wanted to take the med school approach. You wouldn't have a doctor coming out of a med school that hadn't practiced in a hospital the entire time through their education. Yet we see that in the business world all the time, that we have faculty who have never worked a day in their lives outside of academia, and we have students learning about the business world but never setting a foot in the door of the business world while they're being educated. And I said what I wanted to do was build the med school model here, and that's when we launched the Design and Usability Center parallel to the graduate program. And it was very easy to convince people that this was the right thing to do in a business school when they started seeing companies from all over the world flocking to our center, looking to us for advice and asking us, for input on products before they're released to the marketplace, and not just a typical classroom project, but where we would actually influence product design and product launches, and to showcase that. to showcase that. And then on the other side of that is when you could prove that you could take your students, your graduates, and place them in some of the best organizations in the country or the world. Again, it's very easy to convince people. So you can convince people on paper and try to just persuade them with a good argument, or you can just prove yourself. And I believe in proving yourself.
Were there any objections to the program before it launched?
So I was very fortunate that I had high-level administrative support, and I think that's critical, and it's not unlike what we've been telling people for 20 years. I think on the development side is to try to find advocates within your organization, and I think that's it. You have to find your advocate, and I was fortunate to have that. Now there were some interesting problems from a disciplinary perspective. So our computer science people, I think, I think they looked at us and said, "What are you doing there?" Because I don't think they fully understood, the human-computer interaction aspect of it, what we were doing in usability and design. I don't think they quite got it. It kind of looked like what they were doing, but it was different enough that they weren't terribly threatened. But I think they were cautious. And then on the other side, and more recently, this is the interesting development in the last 5 years, as the field has changed, is marketing is more worried about us. I can remember 15 years ago when we were starting out, marketing people said, "Well, the technology world is not different." And I remember one of my colleagues saying, "Toothpaste, cereals, sneakers, computers, doesn't matter. If you want me to sell it, I'll sell it." And they didn't realize that technology is a pretty unique space, that it works differently in the marketplace. There are some things that are in common and other things that are not. And I think as they're watching today, where not only here but in the outside world, where the user experience is becoming the brand, and where brand was traditionally controlled by marketing, there's always going to be a threat in that change, as I said before. So I'm not setting up obstacles that would stop us, but it is interesting. I think what we experience here in the academic world is what practicing professionals face on the outside world. Not at all different. But I would give the same advice to anybody who would say, "Well, how do you get past it?" Again, I don't fight. I don't fight it. Fighting doesn't win, and I learned that after probably 5 or 10 years of fighting in the 80s. It just doesn't work. There's got to be another path to getting where we want to get to. And same thing here. So I'll give you an example. So in recent years, I think there's tremendous opportunities for user experience professionals in the healthcare space. And I think it's going to be one of the huge growth spaces moving forward. And so I could go out there and, here in Boston and, go across the river to the folks at the Harvard School of Public Health and say, "You really need me. And I want to be an equal partner on some of your research projects with doctors at Children's Hospital." But instead, what I did is I started off very slowly, people I knew in those organizations, and I said, let me contribute. I'm not asking for anything. Let me make a contribution to a research project that you're working on, a funded research project. I'm not asking for any money. I'm not asking for anything. Just let me help you. Let me work with you, so on and so forth. And as soon as I could prove that I brought value, and I brought value in a number of different ways, I think in helping them produce better results, but they also found that their grant applications became more competitive, because they were only ones that were submitting grant applications where they had domain expertise, technical expertise, but now somebody who was looking at it the perspective of the user or the patient, whoever the user happened to be. And so very quickly, now I had them calling me. And that's it. So I went out and I proved myself without asking for anything in return. Demonstrate the value you can bring. Understand what's important to these colleagues, whether they be in development, whether they be in marketing, whether they be in another field. So in their world, what drove their whole lives is success with grants. And as soon as they found out that adding user experience to their grant applications made them more competitive, I was the most popular guy in town. And I think that's what we have to do wherever we find ourselves, whatever culture or business that we find ourselves in.
Great. That's exactly why I'm here. So what would you recommend to people who wish to promote a design or UX research academic program with conservative universities that are sometimes led by technologists, computer science people.
Sure, and not to be not to be redundant, but I think again a lot of the things I said before is sit down with them and find out what they value. Okay, what's important to them, some of the challenges that they face, and try to partner with them. Okay, and do it, and don't do it in a forceful way, and don't do it in a kind of pushing way, but just to be very open to partnering with them and letting them drive the process. I find a lot of times we have a tendency to work with people who have giant egos, and you don't want to come up against that, and so you're better off just coming in and just being very quiet, and offering to help out. And then you'll build on that. I mean, someday you will be a little bit more pushy. You'll be in a position where you will control, but that's not going to happen out of the gate. So again, find out very much like what we practice with our users. Find out what people value. I mean, I think we can use this in our relationship building. Exactly what builds success for us with our customers and our users. Find out what they value. Find out what drives their lives. Find out what their goals are. What are some of the problems and the challenges that they face, and see where can UX and where can our research make a contribution there.